And will there be anything else for you today, sir?
No, thank you.
I believe this is everything.
At 47, she believed her chance at love had passed forever. But when a stranger walked through her door one golden morning, everything she thought she knew about second chances was about to change. This is the story of two hearts that refused to believe it was too late. The early morning light fell softly across the quiet streets of Copper Springs, turning everything it touched into shades of honey and bronze. Inside a small dress shop on Main Street, Margaret Ellen Hayes pressed her tired hands flat against the counter and gazed out through the smudged glass window. She was 47 years old. A woman shaped by loss and hardship, her hands roughened by years of needle and thread. Her husband Thomas had been gone for 12 long years now, taken by a sudden fever that left her alone with grief that never quite healed. In the years since his death, Margaret had built something small but her own. This shop. These walls. The dresses hanging on wooden mannequins, the wedding gowns she stitched for young women still full of hope. She made her living with her skilled hands, and she asked for nothing more. Her hair, once the warm red of autumn, had slowly turned to silver. She wore it in a simple braid that fell down her back. When she looked in the mirror these days, she saw a woman who had accepted her fate. No more dreams. No more foolish hopes. Just quiet days and quieter nights. The bell above the door suddenly rang out, breaking the morning stillness. Margaret lifted her eyes, expecting Mrs. Patterson or one of the ranch wives coming for alterations. Instead, she found herself looking at a man she'd never seen before. He was tall, with wide shoulders that nearly filled the doorframe. As he stepped inside and removed his worn hat, she noticed gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes were a deep brown, warm like polished wood. "Morning, ma'am," he said. His voice rolled out low and steady, gentle as summer thunder moving across open land. "I'm hoping you might be able to help me. Got some shirts that need mending. The woman over at the general store told me you're the finest seamstress in town." Margaret felt warmth creep into her cheeks, a feeling so strange and unexpected that it startled her. "Well," she said, managing a small smile, "I'm the only seamstress in town. So I suppose that makes me the best by default." The man laughed, and the sound filled the tiny shop with unexpected warmth. "Fair enough," he replied. "But I'd trust your work over any fancy city tailor any day. There's something real about craftsmanship in a small town. Something honest." He walked closer, and Margaret noticed the easy confidence in his movements. Not arrogant, just comfortable in his own skin. A man who knew who he was. She guessed he was near her age, perhaps a year or two older. Lines creased the corners of his eyes, marks left by equal measures of joy and sorrow. "Name Samuel Walker," he said, extending a calloused hand toward her. "Just bought the old Patterson ranch outside town. Thought it was time to start fresh somewhere new." Margaret reached out and shook his hand. His grip was strong but gentle at the same time. "Margaret Hayes," she told him. "Most people call me Maggie, though I've never understood why. Never felt like a Maggie to me." Samuel tilted his head slightly, studying her face with an expression that made her want to look away and yet somehow couldn't. "Margaret suits you," he said quietly. "It's a dignified name. The kind of name for a woman who's weathered storms and come through them still standing." Margaret didn't know how to respond to that. Words caught in her throat. So instead, she simply gestured at the basket he carried. "Let me take a look at what you've brought." For the next hour, Margaret examined his shirts, measuring tiers, noting missing buttons, checking frayed collars. Meanwhile, Samuel wandered slowly through her shop, asking thoughtful questions about the fabrics she preferred, the patterns she created, the stories behind the elegant wedding dresses displayed in the corner. And he listened. Really listened. Not just waiting for his turn to speak, the way so many men did. He seemed genuinely interested in her answers. When he finally left, promising to return in 3 days to collect his mended clothes. Margaret stood alone in the silence. She pressed one hand against her chest and felt her heart beating faster than it had in years. "Don't be silly," she whispered to the empty room. "You're far too old for this kind of nonsense." But when Samuel returned 3 days later, and then again 3 days after that, always with more mending that didn't really need doing, Margaret began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about some things. Spring melted into summer, and Samuel became a regular presence in Margaret's world. He brought her wildflowers he'd picked during rides across the prairie, saying their colors reminded him of her. He would sit for hours, drinking coffee and sharing stories from his years driving cattle across vast territories. He told her about Rebecca, his late wife who died giving birth to a baby who didn't survive either. About the deep loneliness that had shadowed him ever since. "I thought I'd never feel anything again," he confessed one afternoon. His hat rested in his hands, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I believed that part of me died with Rebecca. But then I walked into this shop, saw you standing in the morning light, and something inside me came back to life." Margaret shook her head and turned away, suddenly needing to fold fabric that didn't need folding. "Samuel, I'm not young anymore. Whatever you think you see." "I see a woman with kind eyes and strong hands," he interrupted gently, stepping closer. "I see someone who creates beautiful things from simple cloth. I see courage and grace and a heart that's been broken but keeps on beating. And I see someone I want to spend whatever years I have left getting to know." Tears threatened to spill from Margaret's eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. "I'm 47 years old. My hair is gray. My hands are rough from years of work. I'm not the woman I was when I was young and pretty and full of dreams." Samuel reached out and took her hand, cradling it carefully between both of his. "Margaret," he said softly, "I've been waiting my whole life for you. I just didn't know it until I found you. Age has nothing to do with what the heart wants." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw not just a man, but a reflection of herself. Two people who'd survived loss. Two people carrying scars that had healed but never quite disappeared. Two people standing at the edge of something that felt too wonderful to be real and too real to deny. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "So am I," he said. "But I'm more scared of walking away and never knowing what we could have been together." The summer days stretched long and golden. Margaret found herself doing things she hadn't done in decades. She rode out to Samuel's ranch on Sunday afternoons, sitting on his porch while the sun painted the mountains orange and purple. He played old songs on a battered guitar while she listened. She laughed at his terrible jokes. They argued playfully about whether Mrs. Henderson looked better in blue or green. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Margaret found herself thinking about him. The women of Copper Springs noticed the change. They commented on the color returning to her cheeks, the new light dancing in her eyes, the way she hummed softly while she worked. Some smiled knowingly. A few whispered behind their hands, wondering what business a woman her age had carrying on like a schoolgirl. Margaret heard the whispers. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care what anyone thought. One evening in late August, Samuel invited her to the ranch for dinner. He'd prepared roasted chicken and fresh vegetables from his garden. They ate by candlelight on the back porch, stars spreading like scattered diamonds across the velvet darkness above them. "I want to ask you something," Samuel said, setting down his fork and reaching across the table for her hand. "But I want you to take your time answering. Don't say anything tonight. Think about it. Sleep on it. Look at it from every angle." Margaret's heart began to pound. "What is it?" He stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple gold ring, worn smooth by time but still gleaming in the candlelight. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wore it for 53 years of marriage. She told me once that love doesn't have an expiration date. That the heart can find its home at any age. He paused, his eyes glistening. Margaret, I love you. I love the way you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating. I love how you talk to your thread when it tangles. I love your strength, your kindness, your beauty. Will you marry me? Margaret couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth with her free hand, overwhelmed by feelings she buried so deep she thought they no longer existed. Samuel, Don't answer tonight, he reminded her gently. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She didn't sleep that night. Margaret lay in her small bedroom above the shop, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the reasons she should say no. She was too old for this. People would talk. What if she got sick? What if he got sick? What if this was all a mistake born from loneliness rather than real love? But every time her mind found a reason to refuse, her heart answered with a memory. Samuel bringing her coffee when she worked late. Samuel holding her hand as they walked through town, not caring who saw. Samuel looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. In the morning, she did something she'd never done in 12 years, she closed the shop early and rode out to his ranch. He was in the barn brushing down his horse when she appeared in the doorway. The morning light outlined her figure, and he stopped what he was doing, his eyes searching her face. I spent all night thinking, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. I thought about every reason why this is crazy. Why we're both too old for this. Why we should be sensible and content with what we have. Samuel's face fell slightly. He nodded, bracing himself for rejection. But then I thought about something else, Margaret continued, stepping into the barn and moving toward him. I thought about all those years I spent alone, convincing myself that love was only for young people. I thought about how empty my life felt before you walked into my shop. And I remembered something my mother told me when I was a girl. She said love isn't about finding someone who makes your life easier. It's about finding someone who makes your life worth living. She stopped in front of him and reached up to touch his face with her work-worn hand. You make my life worth living, Samuel Walker. And if you'll still have me, gray hair, wrinkles, and all, my answer is yes. The sound that escaped Samuel's throat was half laugh, half sob. He swept her into his arms and held her close, burying his face in her silver-streaked hair, his whole body shaking with relief and joy. I've been waiting for you, he whispered against her ear. My whole life, I've been waiting for you. They were married in the little church at the edge of town on a crisp October morning. Margaret wore a dress she'd made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Samuel wore a new suit that made him look both uncomfortable and handsome. The whole town came to witness it. Even those who had whispered about the impropriety of romance at their age stood in the pews with tissues in hand, moved despite themselves by the sight of two people who'd found each other against all odds. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Samuel kissed Margaret with a tenderness that made her knees weak, a cheer rose from the congregation. Mrs. Henderson, Margaret's oldest customer, wiped tears from her eyes and declared it the most romantic thing she'd ever seen. That night, in the farmhouse that was now their home, Samuel and Margaret sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt she'd made years ago, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Are you happy? Samuel asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Happier than I ever thought I could be, Margaret replied. I wasted so many years believing I wasn't worthy of this. Believing that love was only for the young and beautiful. You are beautiful, Samuel said firmly. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Not just because of how you look, though I think you're lovely, but because of who you are. Because of your strength and kindness and courage. Beauty like that only grows with time. Margaret leaned into his warmth, feeling a peace settle over her that she'd never known before. She had spent so long being alone, being strong, being the woman who needed no one. And now, wrapped in her husband's arms under an endless sky, she understood that real strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about being brave enough to let someone in. The years that followed were the happiest of Margaret's life. She moved her shop to the front room of Samuel's farmhouse, and women from towns miles away traveled to buy her dresses and have their wedding gowns made by the woman whose own love story had become legendary in the region. Samuel's ranch prospered. Together they built a life filled with laughter, honest work, and the quiet contentment of two hearts beating as one. They took in a young orphaned girl named Rose, raising her as their own daughter. They watched her grow into a fine young woman who eventually married a kind rancher from the next county. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel gave Margaret a leather-bound journal, handmade by a craftsman in Santa Fe. "For your stories," he said. "I want you to write down everything. Our meeting, our courtship, our life together. So that someday, some woman who thinks she's too old for love will read your words and know that she's wrong." Margaret took the journal with tears in her eyes and began writing that very night. She wrote about the morning Samuel first walked into her shop. She wrote about the fear she'd felt and the joy that replaced it. She wrote about learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe in a future she'd never dared imagine. And she wrote about love, real love, lasting love, the kind that doesn't fade with age but deepens with every passing year. When Margaret passed away at the age of 73, peacefully in her sleep with Samuel holding her hand, the whole town mourned. But Samuel, through his grief, found comfort in one thing. For 26 years, he had loved her. For 26 years, she had loved him. And in the journal she left behind, on the very last page, Margaret had written a message just for him. "My dearest Samuel. If you're reading this, then I have gone ahead to wait for you. But do not rush. Take your time. Live your days fully, knowing that you gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You taught me that it's never too late. You taught me that I was worthy of love. And you taught me that the heart knows no age, no limits, no boundaries. I love you, Samuel Walker. I loved you from the moment you walked into my shop, and I will love you for eternity. Wait for me no longer. I'll be waiting for you." Samuel lived another 5 years, tending the ranch, loving their daughter Rose, and telling anyone who would listen about the woman who had changed his life. And when he finally passed, the townspeople said that a smile crossed his face in those final moments, as if he could see something wonderful waiting for him just beyond the veil. Some people say that love is a young person's game. That romance is wasted on those who have already lived most of their lives. But the people of Copper Springs knew better. They had witnessed something rare and precious between Samuel and Margaret Walker. A love that had bloomed in the autumn of their lives and burned brighter than any summer passion. Because true love doesn't ask your age. It doesn't care about gray hair or wrinkles or the years that have passed. It simply arrives. Unexpected and irresistible, and asks only one thing of you. The courage to say yes.